is Ethan Carlisle, and revenge is the fire that fuels me. When I was 10 years old, I watched a monstrous entity tear my mother apart. Her screams still echo in my nightmares, a constant reminder of the darkness that stole her away. Now, a decade later, I'm a college student at Ashwood University, and I've tracked that entity here. Tonight, I will end it. I told my friends we were heading to the old abandoned mansion near the edge of campus for a thrill, a haunted house adventure to kick off our senior year. They were excited and eager for a night of scares and camaraderie. They had no idea I was leading them into a trap, using them as pawns in my twisted game of vengeance. There was Mark, my roommate and best friend, always up for a challenge. Sarah, the skeptic who never believed in ghosts. Jamie, the joker whose laughter masks a keen intellect. Lisa, the compassionate one who saw the best in everyone. And Greg, the quiet, studious type, who followed me because he trusted my judgment. They trusted me implicitly, and that trust was a weapon I wielded ruthlessly. We met at the campus gates as the sun dipped below the horizon, the last rays of light casting long shadows across the grounds. The mansion loomed in the distance, its windows dark and gaping like empty eye sockets. "All right, guys. Ready for the adventure of a lifetime?" I asked, forcing a grin. They cheered, their voices echoing in the crisp evening air. The walk to the mansion was filled with laughter and teasing. Jamie kept making ghost noises, trying to spook Sarah, who rolled her eyes and told him to grow up. Mark and Greg were discussing the history of the mansion and its reputation for being haunted. Lisa walked beside me, her arm linked through mine, her warmth a stark contrast to the cold determination in my heart. When we reached the mansion, I felt the entity's presence immediately. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to deepen. My friends felt it too. Their laughter was dying down, replaced by uneasy silence. "This place gives me the creeps," Jamie said, trying to laugh, but failing. "Let's get this over with." "Stick together and keep your flashlights on," I instructed, my voice steady. "We'll be fine." The front door creaked open, revealing a grand foyer filled with dust and cobwebs. Our footsteps echoed ominously as we stepped inside. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and I could feel the entity's malevolent gaze upon us. We explored the mansion, moving from room to room. Each step brought us closer to the basement, where I knew the entity waited. I had spent years researching, following every lead and every clue. This was its lair, the place where it drew its power. "This place is amazing," Mark said, his voice hushed. "I can see why people think it's haunted." "Just old and creepy if you ask me," Sarah replied, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. We reached the basement door, and I felt a shiver of anticipation. "All right. This is where it gets interesting," I said, pushing the door open. "Everyone stay close." The basement was even colder. The air was damp and musty. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing old furniture, broken crates, and strange symbols carved into the walls. The symbols matched the ones I had found in my mother's journal, the ones that marked the entity's presence. "Ethan, what is this place?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. "It's where we'll find our ghost," I replied, my heart pounding. "Get ready." We moved deeper into the basement, and then I saw it, the altar. It was an ancient, crumbling structure, covered in dark stains and surrounded by more of the strange symbols. The entity's power radiated from it, a palpable force that made my skin crawl. "Everyone, form a circle around the altar," I instructed, pulling out the items I had prepared: iron stakes, salt, and a book of ancient incantations. "What's all this for?" Greg asked, his brow furrowing. "It's part of the ritual," I said, my voice steady. "Trust me." They obeyed, their trust in me unshaken. As they formed the circle, I began to recite the incantation, the words heavy and unnatural on my tongue. The temperature dropped even further, and the air seemed to hum with energy. Suddenly, the shadows around us came alive. The entity materialized in the center of the circle, its eyes burning with malevolence. It was just as I remembered, dark, twisted, and filled with an unholy power. "Now!" I shouted, and we attacked. But the entity was faster and more powerful than I had anticipated. With a flick of its hand, Mark was thrown against the wall with a sickening crack. He didn't get up. Lisa screamed and tried to run, but the entity caught her, its claws raking across her back. She fell to the ground, lifeless. Panic set in, and we scattered. The entity picked us off one by one. Sarah tried to recite another incantation, but the entity silenced her with a wave of its hand. She crumpled to the ground, her eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Jamie and Greg tried to fight, but their weapons were useless. They fell, their bodies broken and lifeless. I was the last one standing. I backed away, my heart pounding as the entity advanced on me. "Why?" I demanded, my voice trembling. "Why did you kill her?" The entity smiled, its eyes boring into mine. "Your mother was a fool, just as you are. She tried to stop me, and now you will suffer the same fate." Desperation fueled my next move. I lunged at the entity with the iron stake, driving it into its chest. The entity let out a deafening scream, its form flickering and dissolving into the night. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. The silence that followed was deafening. My friends were gone. Their lives were sacrificed for my vengeance. The weight of what I had done, the betrayal of their trust, crushed me. I had won, but at what cost? I stumbled out of the mansion with the first light of dawn breaking on the horizon. The campus was eerily quiet, the world unaware of the horrors that had taken place. I knew I could never stay here and never look anyone in the eye again. I had to leave to disappear. I sit now in a cheap motel room, far from Ashwood University, writing this down as a confession and a warning. I achieved my goal, but at what cost? I am a broken man, haunted by the ghosts of my friends and by the guilt and the pain. I thought killing the entity would bring me peace, but it has only brought me more suffering. Revenge is a poison, and it has destroyed me. I write this in the hope that others will learn from my mistakes and not follow the same dark path. I am Ethan Carlisle, and this is my story.
The ad was tucked away in the back pages of the local paper, almost as if it were hiding. A live-in housekeeper is needed. High pay and free room and board. Discretion required. It sounded too good to be true, but I was desperate. My name is Emily, and I was broke, out of options, and about to be evicted. So I called the number. The voice on the other end was smooth, almost hypnotic. "Come by the estate at 8 p.m., he said. "We'll discuss the terms." The estate was miles out of town, a sprawling mansion that seemed out of place among the surrounding wilderness. As I approached, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. I hesitated at the gate, my hand trembling as I pressed the intercom button. "Emily Thompson," I said, my voice wavering. The gate swung open, creaking ominously. I walked up the long driveway, my heart pounding. The front door opened before I could knock, and there stood my employer. He was tall, with sharp features and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Welcome, Emily," he said, his voice as smooth as it had been on the phone. "I'm Mr. Hawthorne. Please, come in." The interior of the mansion was as grand as its exterior, filled with antique furniture and rich tapestries. It was beautiful but cold, almost oppressive. Mr. Hawthorne led me to a cozy sitting room where a fire crackled in the fireplace. Have a seat, he said, gesturing to a plush armchair. Would you like some tea? Yes, please, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. He disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a steaming cup. This house has been in my family for generations, he said, handing me the tea. I need someone I can trust to help me maintain it. I took a sip of the tea, savoring its warmth. I can do that, I said. But why the need for discretion? A shadow passed over his face. This place has secrets, he said, and I prefer to keep them that way. Can you handle that? I nodded, though a part of me wanted to run. Yes, Mr. Hawthorne, I can handle it. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Good. You start tomorrow. The first few days were uneventful, almost pleasant. The work was hard, but the pay was more than generous, and the room I was given was more luxurious than any place I'd ever stayed. But there were strange things, too. I'd catch glimpses of Mr. Hawthorne talking to himself in empty rooms or hear whispers in the dead of night. One evening, I found a locked door in the basement. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tried the handle. It didn't budge. Just as I was about to leave, Mr. Hawthorne appeared behind me, his face pale. That room is off limits, he said, his voice stern. Do you understand? I nodded, fear gripping me. Yes, I'm sorry. As the days turned into weeks, my unease grew. I started to notice changes in Mr. Hawthorne. He would disappear for hours, returning disheveled and distracted. Sometimes his eyes would glow with an unnatural light, and his voice would take on a guttural tone. One night, I was awoken by screams. I followed the sound to the locked basement door. This time it was ajar. I pushed it open and descended the stairs, my heart pounding. The screams grew louder and more desperate. In the dim light of the basement, I saw Mr. Hawthorne, his body contorted in agony. He was surrounded by strange symbols painted on the floor, and his eyes glowed with that same eerie light. Emily, you shouldn't be here, he gasped, his voice a mix of his own and something darker. What's happening to you? I asked, my voice trembling. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a strange mix of pain and longing. I'm possessed, he said, by a demon. I've been trying to exorcise it for years, but it won't die. I took a step back, my mind reeling. Why didn't you tell me? He reached out, his hand trembling. I didn't want to scare you away. I've grown fond of you, Emily, more than I should. Tears filled my eyes. What can I do to help? He shook his head. There's only one way to defeat it. I have to die, but I can't do it myself. The demon won't let me. No, I whispered, the realization dawning on me. I can't. You must, he said, his voice breaking. It's the only way. If you don't, it will consume me, and then it will come for you. I felt a cold weight settle in my chest. How? I asked, barely able to speak. There's a dagger, he said, pointing to a table covered in ritualistic items. It's the only thing that can kill me and the demon. With shaking hands, I picked up the dagger, its blade cold and heavy. I'm so sorry, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. He smiled a sad, resigned smile. Thank you, Emily, for everything. I plunged the dagger into his heart, feeling the resistance as it pierced through. His eyes widened in pain, then softened. The glow faded, and he fell to the floor, lifeless. As I stood there, shaking and crying, I felt a strange warmth envelop me. The symbols on the floor glowed briefly, then faded. The house seemed to exhale, the oppressive atmosphere lifting. I buried Mr. Hawthorne in the garden beneath a willow tree. I left the estate the next morning, the weight of what I had done pressing down on me. Now, as I write this, I can still feel his presence. I can't escape the memories of that night, the sound of his screams, the look in his eyes. I wonder if I did the right thing or if I was just another pawn in the demon's game. But one thing is certain. I will never forget Mr. Hawthorne or the dark secret he carried.
As I lie here, gasping for breath on the cold, hard floor of this decrepit room, I can't help but reflect on the twisted path that brought me to this final, agonizing moment. The smell of decay and despair hangs heavy in the air, mingling with the acrid stench of my own blood. I can feel my life slipping away, each heartbeat weaker than the last. This is the end I deserve, the end I bargained for when I sold my soul to the devil. It all started a decade ago, in the smoky back room of a rundown bar. I was desperate, broke, and drowning in a sea of debt. I had lost everything: my job, my family, my dignity. That night, a stranger approached me, his eyes glinting with a sinister promise. He introduced himself as Lucian and offered me a deal: unimaginable power and wealth in exchange for my soul. In my desperation, I agreed, sealing my fate with a handshake that burned like fire. From that moment on, my life changed. Money flowed like water, and I climbed the ranks of society with alarming speed. I indulged in every vice and every sin, reveling in my newfound power. But with each passing day, the darkness within me grew stronger, demanding more and more from me. The crimes I committed to maintain my status were unspeakable: betrayal, extortion, and murder. I became a monster, a soulless wretch consumed by greed and ambition. My hands tremble as I recall the faces of my victims, their eyes wide with terror, their pleas for mercy echoing in my mind. I silenced their voices and extinguished their lives, all to feed the insatiable hunger for power that Lucian had awakened within me. I told myself it was necessary, that it was the price I had to pay, but deep down I knew the truth. I had become a slave to the devil's whims, a puppet dancing on the strings of damnation. The first cracks in my facade appeared when I met Anna. She was everything I wasn't: kind, compassionate, and pure. For a brief moment I thought I could change, and that I could find redemption in her love. But Lucian had other plans. He saw my weakness and that I could, my desire for salvation, and he exploited it. He made me choose between Anna and the power I had come to crave. I chose the power, and Anna paid the price. Her death haunts me more than any other. I see her face every time I close my eyes and hear her final scream echoing in my ears. I killed her, just as surely as if I had plunged the knife into her heart myself. From that moment on, my descent into darkness was complete. There was no turning back, no redemption to be found. I was a damned man, and I embraced it with open arms. Now, as I lie here dying, I can see Lucian standing over me, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Your time is up," he says, his voice like velvet wrapped around a blade. "Your soul is mine." I try to speak, to beg for mercy, but the words won't come. The pain is overwhelming, a searing agony that burns through my veins. I can feel the darkness closing in, pulling me into the abyss. This is the end I chose and the end I deserve. With my last breath, I see Anna's face, her eyes filled with sorrow. I'm sorry. I want to tell her. I'm so sorry, but it's too late. The devil has come to collect his due, and all that remains for me is an eternity of torment. As the darkness engulfs me, I realize the true horror of my fate. The power, the wealth, the sins, all of it was for nothing. I sold my soul for a fleeting taste of glory, and now I will pay the price forever. The devil's laughter echoes in my ears as I am dragged into the depths of hell, my final, damning realization clear. There is no escape from the darkness I willingly embraced.